that's coming up. It is.
This is NHTV2, North Haven Government Television, a service of North Haven Community Television. The following program is brought to you through the support of the Town of North Haven.
All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the October 19th meeting of the Board of Finance. We'll move into our agenda. We do have the minutes from our last meeting, September 21. Were there any comments on those minutes?
I just have one very minor point, which is just, I think we need to make an amendment on, I think it's page 2, where we voted on the minutes from the previous year. I believe Mr. DiCello has to abstain from that vote.
Okay. Cameron, do you have that?
Which voting is it? Page 2?
Page 2
Yes.
of the minutes.
Where it says minutes,
Nick-
after a brief discussion.
Yeah.
Oh,
Nick should be
okay, I
abstained.
understand.
He should be
Yeah.
abstaining. Yep, just a minor point, but,
He wasn't a member.
exactly.
All right, with that, I'll take a motion.
I'll make it.
Anyone second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, item 2, as I mentioned, we have an update on the unexpended prior year funds discussions we've been having. During the prior month, Mike and I met with both Howard Wardlow and Patrick Sturt from the Board of Ed. We have an understanding in principle that we will create one fund, a unexpended prior year fund. Any funds moving into that account will be voted on by this Board of Finance. Dollars going out will be at the exclusive purview of the Board of Ed. They would have to vote on it. But just as we do right now, we will get a report monthly with funds as they move out of the account in similar fashion to do with the, for instance, the special ed funds right now. He is going to move the dollars that are currently or will be sitting in the CapEx fund over to the unexpended prior year fund, because during our discussions we quickly agreed that there's no need to have more than one fund. They only need to have one fund, and from out of there, the Board of Ed can make their vote on whether to go to CapEx or any other expense that might be desired by the Board of Ed. So the intention is that they will bring it to the Board of Ed in November. We will have the agreement here at our meeting next month, with the hopes that we will vote on that agreement during next month's meeting. Any questions?
So we are only to vote on the additions to that prior year unexpensed fund, and in terms of dollars, and not any uses or purposes of that.
Correct.
Yeah. That, I didn't think that we would be primarily the approver, but
Primarily approval
of the use of those funds, of how they're utilized. I do understand that, Board of Ed and their subcommittees deserve to designate the use of those funds. But I somehow was under the impression that we would have some sort of role or oversight to see that their use was in line with our vision of what they should do.
Well, that's the guidance we got from our town attorney, but it's not inconsistent, Michael, with what happened. I mean, granted, we get a budget from the Board of Ed at the beginning of the year, and we see all the line items just like we do now, but when we get right down to it, we're voting on a number for the Board of Ed, and they have the right to move the dollars around right now. We don't have that oversight.
I understand.
Okay, so if I could just chime in and add a little bit of context here. So first of all, This board, with the exception of Mr. DiCello, have already voted to memorialize a single fund, and it's called the Board of Ed Carryover Fund. So that was created, it exists. It isn't reported in our monthly special funds report, but it still exists. And I read very carefully the email from Mr. D'Onofrio, and he's actually talking about two different Connecticut statutes as well as two different situations. So the first one is Connecticut Statute 10-222, and that basically gives the Board of Education the discretion throughout the fiscal year to be able to transfer money around at their discretion, and they vote on it each and every month when they do have transfers. They can move money from one line item to another line item. But the second situation that he describes is the use of unexpended funds at or after the close of the fiscal year. In other words, surplus funds. We give them a certain amount of money, and then the difference between what they spend and what we give them is the definition of surplus. So the use of those surplus funds is then dictated by this Connecticut Statute 10-248A. So that's what we're really talking about today, is are we actually living up to this particular statute? And so that refers to a non-relapsing account, and that we, the Board of Finance, each and every year have the ability to vote on how much and whether we transfer some amount of money. It might be zero, it might be a fraction of the 2%, it might be the total amount, into this non-relapsing account. So first of all, it already exists, and second of all, this is a vote that has to take place each and every year. And third of all, I think the spirit of this entire process was created by our dearly departed Mr. Swinkowski, who made it abundantly clear that he would be the gatekeeper, and that there would be a gatekeeper in addition to the Board of Education that was determining how this money would be utilized. So if you look at the and we can get to this when we get to the Board of Education, but Howard refers to it as the Capital Improvement Fund. That's not accurate. And Mr. D'Onofrio refers to it as the BOE unexpended previous year funds. Well, that's not what we call it either. So there's already an existing fund. I think we need to vote on it, but in the end, we're not voting to give them carte blanche use of up to 2% of the budget, which is, I believe, exactly what they are expecting. And I think there has to be, as I mentioned last month, some system of checks and balances, not just seeing after the fact that it falls under one category or another category. I think we have to have some use of our discretionary authority here, because the people that created these Connecticut statutes intentionally, as Mr. Frieda pointed out, intentionally used the word may rather than shall. And I personally interpret that as they did that so that we have some discretionary authority, since we have the responsibility for the entire town, not just for the Board of Education, but for the entire town. And so in the last 3 years, the Board of Ed has had substantial surpluses and the town has not. And so I think we need to be very cautious about giving up this this responsibility as well as this level of financial control. So those are my thoughts.
Well, what responsibility are we giving up?
If we simply say, yes, we're going to vote to put X amount of dollars into a given account and they can use it any way they want, that is not what this particular Connecticut statute says.
I think we probably touched on this last month, but I mean, you know, the memorandum, the email from Howard, granted he's not the town attorney, but it was consistent with what we got from Jeff. And I'm repeating myself from what I just said in month, but my understanding is we can't tell them where to spend the money. We can, however, and do and will authorize the money going into the fund.
So historically, prior to the enactment of this particular statute and our ability to act upon it, Any surpluses from the Board of Ed went into the general fund. It is the people's money, and it went into the general fund.
It didn't
So-
happen though, by the way.
I'm sorry?
There was very few times that I can recall where they transferred
just
money.
spent
What's that?
They just ended up spending it somewhere.
Correct.
Well, that's not entirely the case, but go ahead, I will hear the rest of your
Yeah,
point.
In one or two cases, I believe Mr. Frieda has pointed out, for example, when we needed to put in Wi-Fi in the various elementary schools. They were allowed to not only keep a portion of the Board of Education money, but I believe that even that money was even supplemented from the town side surplus. But in any case, with very, very few exceptions, any surpluses on the Board of Ed side simply went into the general fund because it is the people's money, right? Once they don't spend it,
Okay, so we'll have that prerogative as a board, that if they come to us next July, for instance, and want to transfer surplus money in, the board will have its prerogative to vote and turn it down if that's what we want to do.
Do you want to get into, Tim, special ed versus self-insured versus capital?
Well,
Because there's a distinction among the three,
yes.
meaning that
Well-
we don't have a vote on special ed.
well, right. I mean, as I think we talked about, Jeff's view was that the special education ones don't fall under this particular statute that you're talking about.
He didn't even mention it.
Right.
The special ed fund isn't even mentioned,
Right.
nor is the Board of Ed carryover fund. There's
Right.
4 funds. Sergeant, please.
That's right. And the capital fund, I mean, again, the discussion was to move it over to this particular fund.
So, Tim, if I could
Yeah.
address some of the history that Mrs. Barrett mentioned. So let me take everyone back 11 years ago. It was because of a discussion I had with the Board of Ed and the superintendent at the time, Sarah Querfeld, and then Bob Cronin came in. There was no surplus from the Board of Ed. It was being spent at the end of the year. It was yours truly that went to them and said, I'll tell you what we can do here. You don't spend it just for the sake of spending it. Any surplus that you can deliver, we will put it in the general fund with a designation that it's Board of Ed money for future capital expenses. This way, we're saving the taxpayers' dollars in the future. And a good example of that, the first or second year, was they came in with a $355,000 surplus that would have been spent if I didn't have that agreement with Bob Cronin. We then had Common Core come into the curriculum in the state of Connecticut. We needed about $350,000 worth of computer upgrades. And guess where we got it from? From the money they didn't spend from the agreement that I had with the Board of Ed. As the years went on, this model here that we created with the Board of Ed spread through the Connecticut Council of Boards of Education, and it ended up becoming a state statute because of what we did here. So if we didn't do this, there would have never been a surplus with the Board of Ed. We've created a model to save the taxpayers' money by allowing them to come in under budget, if they can, and we give them the money back for future capital expenditures that would be baked into the next year's mill rate. That's the history of it.
And so those particular dollars that you set aside were only for capital expenditures, correct?
Well, in the beginning, yes, the beginning.
So we're not just talking about capital expenditures here. We're talking about capital, special ed, and medical and dental, right?
So you mentioned Ed Swinkowski being the gatekeeper. It was actually Ed and I were the gatekeepers. And as a gatekeeper, they came to us with a surplus. That was the $1 million we talked about. We knew, Ed and I, as the gatekeepers, that there was a rising level of claims history with illnesses on the Board of Ed. So what we did as gatekeepers, we allowed them to put the money back into not only self-insured medical account, but also special ed, as I mentioned here about 8 times before, to try to minimize the volatility of the inflow of special needs students coming into North Haven. So, again, with those two, we actually saved the taxpayers' money because we took their surplus and we reinvested it back into 3 areas with capital that would have been increases in their budget next year because they wouldn't have the funds.
Right. So the special ed fund, other than a very recent expenditure on legal fees, hasn't really been touched since they put that $1 million in it. So that's just sitting there. Agreed, it's in a perfect world, having a rainy day fund for special ed, as we have talked about many times, is a good idea, because this is a very attractive town that has a very effective special ed program. So there are students that both move in and move out, and we can unfortunately pay the price of that. So, but if you look at the memorandum from Howard, he's referring to moving money exclusively into the BOE Capital Projects Fund. So that would be limiting it to just capital funds. What we're talking about is this other fund that we've created, this BOE carryover fund. And Mike, now in the absence of Mr. Schwankowski being here, who is the gatekeeper? Because the impression that I'm getting from Mr. Donnie is that they will have absolute discretion over how this money is utilized if, in fact, we vote that it
I
can be
guess I might
transferred.
point out, that the fund that you are referring to, there's no money in that fund that I'm aware of right now.
But it exists, right? Because it was drained.
I guess that's probably true, yes.
Yeah.
So the gatekeeper is the Board of Ed, that's the answer to the question, by the way.
The gatekeeper is the Board of
Gatekeeper
Ed.
will be
So
the
that's
Board of Ed.
that's in contrast with what Mr. Frieda just said.
Because you're comparing two different programs.
Yeah,
Okay,
programs,
we're here
right.
discussing, what you asked us to do, by the way, was to look into this particular topic. And we
Yes.
did, as I promised, right? And so I've updated the board, and this is what we're talking about. Okay, so the gatekeeper here, based on the conversation we've had with the town attorney and the Board of Ed, is that they will be the gatekeepers of the funds, of the expenditures, excuse me. Will either approve or deny any request for excess money to move into the fund. And at that point, though, the Board of Ed has got a control and will review the request for dollars going on the fund.
So it does sound like the carryover fund, newly created, is more or less a holding account from which funds will go for different purposes to other accounts. So it may increase the amount of reserves for special ed or for medical expenses.
I think Mike was
pointing capital account.
Not to interrupt you, Mike, but I think what Mike was pointing out before is that those two accounts, which I know Nancy in the past has talked about having their money having moved there, don't fall under the purview of this particular item.
That's right. That's
Right,
yeah.
in the first step of the surplus funds. But if the Board of Ed decides to move those carryover funds to some other purpose, it could slide into one of their standing accounts.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Which is,
Well,
they just skipped over that
Yeah.
step last year. Rather than
Right.
moving it into the carryover fund, and then from there to the three different special funds, they just skipped over that last year.
So the differences of this new agreement, to me, seem to be the creation of a carryover fund, so we, and at the same time, allowing us to approve of their use of surplus funds.
Plus the fact we're having a written agreement with them.
Okay, right, yes.
So that's the next question. Is this a
Yes.
memorandum of understanding? or-
It'll be an MOU, yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so, because I have several examples from a variety of different towns of MOUs
We'll
specific
have
to
one
this.
next month.
Yeah, we will have the actual draft, the MOU next month,
Yeah.
so.
That would be very helpful.
Okay, so-
Do we have a concern that the Board of Education isn't going to spend these funds in like the most beneficial way possible?
I think it's really a question of having some control over the people's money outside of the budget process. Because once we close the books on a year and there's a surplus, then I consider that to be outside of the budget. And in theory, that really should be something that not only goes before this board, but I believe should also go before the people of North Haven at a town meeting. How do you want this money to be spent? Whether it's a surplus on the town side or a surplus on the Board of Ed side. Because again, this is the taxpayers' money.
Well, don't
They-
forget, they don't have that right now, okay? So to the extent that the town had $1 million surplus, Nancy, okay, we don't go back to the voters and say, we had $1 million surplus, how would you like us to spend that? Okay, it gets rolled into the general fund, and
generally speaking, goes into the budget next year, or
Right.
is used for some other purpose.
But if it's not on the Board of Ed side going to be rolled into the general fund, then who other than the Board of Ed should have some discretionary authority here?
No one.
It's kind of the, fox minding the hen house here. So
Well,
I
we've
think
come
that.
out, no, it's
I
not the
think-
Fox, it's,
Right.
we're monitoring the front end, and again, I guess if they came to us with a request next year to roll some surplus money in, and don't forget, for the most part, they don't have revenues. Part of the reason the town has surpluses sometimes, because sometimes we have lower expenses, but sometimes we have higher revenues. Now, they get grant money, so don't get me wrong, I recognize that, but they don't have revenue besides the fixed dollar that we give them, right? Okay, so in theory, they shouldn't have that much in surpluses, but they do sometimes, right, for different reasons, just like we do for different reasons. But the voters don't vote when the town has a surplus. We just do when it goes into the balance sheet of the town.
Into the rainy day fund.
Right.
So both sides of it. On the town side, we're giving it back to the taxpayers in the rainy day fund because we may need it sooner or later. And on the Board of Ed side, the history has shown we've given it back to the taxpayers in improving areas that would have cost the taxpayers more money if we didn't do that. So we've represented the taxpayers on both sides.
Well, that's certainly one way to present this. The other way to think about this is if on the town side of the budget, we've had 3 years of revenue shortfalls, and we have had to dip into MRSA and other special funds in order to eke out very small surpluses on the town side. But then on the Board of Ed side, not only because they have a much larger budget than on the town side, but also because they've received millions of dollars in federal and state funds, that they have actually had consistently very large surpluses in the last 3 years. So that's where I believe we as a board need to really look at the two and say, do we really need to be giving them back this surplus?
Well, I think that's an argument that can be made by yourself and another member of the
Absolutely,
board next
absolutely.
June or July or August when they come to us.
Because you'll have that right.
Right.
You'll have that
I'm
vote.
not doing this.
Well, actually, aren't we talking about what happened in this last year, or is that year number 2 of it's a done deal?
I was not talking about what happened last year.
No, we're
Okay,
moving
so this is
forward.
going to be 2 years in a row
Right.
in which they've circumvented both this legislation and this process.
Well,
correct?
according to Jeff D'Onofrio, who's a encyclopedia of statutes, he doesn't feel the same way you do. So, I mean, that's all I can tell you.
Well, he's recommending a memorandum of understanding,
Right,
right?
so, but that's to tighten it up a little bit more. Because a lot of towns, and you've done some research also,
For
a lot of
sure.
towns have this.
Right,
So this board has come a long way, and Mike and Tim would know probably better than anybody, that in the beginning, we had no information from the Board of Ed. We're doing more as a Board of Finance than most other Board of Finances ever get from the Board of Ed.
If I can interrupt, this was intended to be an update, that's the way I put it on the agenda. So we're going to have it
Okay.
next month, we can
Sure.
continue the debate next month, we'll have the actual document next month.
Right.
So if we don't mind, if we could move on.
If I could just make one more point about this,
Please, go
because
ahead.
Mr. D'Onofrio did in fact say in his email, funds moved into the capital improvement and BOE unexpended prior year funds at or after the close of the fiscal year must first be approved by the Board of Finance
Yes.
and then by the BOE.
Yeah, but I think I mentioned that we're gonna have one-
So in this last year, it was moved into both medical and dental and capital improvement. So that was done, according to Mr. D'Onofrio, inappropriately.
I don't think he'd agree on the medical fund, but
Right.
I'm sorry, what?
I don't think he would agree on the medical fund.
No, but I'm saying the second part, it was the other portion of it. There was 2 portions totaling, I think, $660,000. And some of it was moved into medical and dental and some into capital improvement. So according to Mr. D'Onofrio, one of the town attorneys, this was done inappropriately. So
All right,
thank you for the update.
let's move on if we could, please.
Okay.
All right, it's not necessarily on the agenda, but Mike did ask for a breakout of the ARPA funds, which was provided to all the members at their seats when they came in. Mike, maybe this is best if you comment on this, if you don't mind, please.
So this is a complete list of projects, including revenue that we have been authorized by the federal government to use that's in our budget. Not all of this is spent. That $7,186,000 represents expenditures plus encumbrances. So what I'll be doing is knocking off some of these projects to get us down to $7,008,000, which is the total number that we have. Now, I'm hoping that we won't need the full $1,670,000 that's budgeted as revenue in this year's budget. And if we don't need it, and let's say that's only hypothetically $1 million, then I can put back in some of these projects. We have about 3 years to spend this before there's a federal audit. So this is where we are at this moment.
Any questions for Mike on the sheet? Any questions?
No, I think I misplaced my sheet.
Oh,
Oh, I have it.
Here, take that one.
Each and every one of these projects, Michael, each and every one of these projects has been cleared through the federal government.
Yeah, so how much change is there from the previous estimates or draft that you had?
Oh, I probably eliminated about $800,000 worth of projects that we would have liked to have done to get down to the $7,000,001.
And again, how does that compare with the actual amount of funds you have available? It's the same amount, isn't it?
No, it's more. We have $7,008,000. So I've got to work to refine this. This is the work in progress right now.
7,008,000. Okay,
Right.
so it's over, but
We're
by
over,
about 180,000.
yeah, in encumbered projects that haven't happened.
Well, that's good. I mean, it's a lot
Yeah.
more refined than your original
Yeah.
ambitious list.
So that's that.
will there be any Board of Ed ARPA money that's utilized for any of these projects?
No,
No.
no.
It seems like some of these items might reduce our capital needs in the future, such as police cruisers.
Well, you know, that we hope so, yes.
Yeah.
That's a good point, that's a good point, Mike.
Mhm.
And Mike, could you just explain what is the Regional Police Command Vehicle?
This is a unit that ties into our regional traffic and accident reconstruction agreements that we have, that we put together here years ago with Madison, Guilford, Brantford, North Brantford. Each municipality is contributing a share to buy that vehicle. And the mobile command vehicle will be then moved around to the different towns based on the needs of what those towns are at that time. That represents our share. That unit is a lot more expensive than our share. Multiple towns will be contributing to buy it.
So the total cost has got to be more than $500,000?
Oh, yeah, yes.
For a single unit?
It's huge. It's a huge
Wow.
mobile command unit. Retrofitted with equipment, technology.
So it's only a portion. Okay.
It is a lot of money. Okay, thank you, Mike. Let's go on to new business. Before we get to the reports, Mike does have an announcement he'd like to inform the board about.
So, the good news is, we had a ratings call 10 days ago, and it was a very intense session, and we got re-rated AAA. So, we had, I mean, I handled the call. I had to really be on my game, ladies and gentlemen. I really did. So, we got re-rated AAA. However, there are still two cautionary tales. We are among the lowest municipalities in score on fund balance and not raising taxes. We are among the highest in strategic management, strategic leadership, operational management, and financial management, and economic development. Those four, once again, offset the other two. So what we're going to have to do here in subsequent meetings, and I'll let Tim take the lead on this in terms of how he wants to handle it, but we're going to have to amend the fund balance policy and come up with a revision to show that even though we're at 8, to show and depict over the course of the next few years how we're going to get to 8, from 8 to 10 to possibly 12. We need to shore up that deficiency, because the other municipal AAA rated cities and towns are a minimum of 12, or I shouldn't say that. They're average 12, but some of them are up to 14 and 16%. And what's happened in the pandemic, these rating agencies have downgraded municipalities immediately, because the fund balance, which at one time was a good ratio percentage-wise, now is not satisfactory in terms of how they look at the long-term fiscal health of the municipality. But we've got the economic development piece, and they like the fact that it's consistent management. They like the fact that the finances are being handled properly. They like all that. So we got to round this again this year, and that's the update. So we're AAA rated. That's the update.
That's great.
So I think, as Mike said, what we'd like to do is have a conversation, perhaps even next month, about our fund balance, our existing target, and where we might want to move that target and how we might do that in the future.
My question would be, if we're strategically run well, and if we have good economic development, and if the financial makeup of our town, the controls and our history show that we're a low risk of unexpected loss, or if our liabilities happen to be low, or if the amount of bonding that we've issued, the amount of bonds we've issued is a low percentage of our overall budget, wouldn't that allow us a lower percentage of reserves?
Well, you're right, and that's how we've been re-rated several times. We got re-rated AAA now. I think it's the 4th consecutive year, maybe even longer. So technically, you're right. I'm concerned about these cautionary tales for the future, and when they consistently remind me of the fund balance and no modest mill rates every year, what they're also thinking about is, and cybersecurity came up on this. Municipalities across the country have been crippled, and it ends up to be financially crippled because of breaches. Now, fortunately, that part of our ratings call, we had the answers. And, Alex has been a great asset to us, Alex Lino. So they like the fact that we're stable that way. I guess what I'm saying, Michael, is this. We can't take anything for granted in the future. It's like any organization or any sports team. And I was captain of all my baseball teams. Every year after the season, I said, how do we shore up some of these positions? And this is a good example. We have to shore up these 2 weaknesses in this government as illustrated by the rating agencies.
All right, well, my unknowing question of the day, which Mr. Leanis will be asking right now, is what about our general liability policy? Would that cover cybersecurity breaches?
Well, from an insurance standpoint, it will, but it ends up being a reactionary mechanism as after the government's crippled. You can't pay bills, you can't receive money if you've got breaches, and it could be devastating, as they have demonstrated or illustrated to me. So,
Yeah, I think, Mike, that's a good question. It sort of falls, in my opinion, in the general discussion of, okay, why does the town have a fund balance, right? It's a safety net, right? We've had a lot of weather events in the last couple of years here, right? And fortunately, sometimes we've gotten reimbursement for them, sometimes we haven't, and sometimes we get partial reimbursement, right? Listen, some towns had to pay ransom for cybersecurity, right? And I'm guessing that's not covered by insurance. There's probably a lot of reasons we can all come up with sitting here.
Yeah, well, I didn't know whether it's covered by insurance or not. That's why
I don't know, actually, per se, Mike. I don't.
And because that seems to be a very predictable exposure.
You got to remember too that, listen, we have a number right now, right? we could find out for reasons that are outside of our control that we run a deficit one year. So all of a sudden, that 8% could become 6.5% because, revenues didn't come in the where we wanted to, right? I mean, listen, we've all looked at the collection rate over the years, right?
Right, and then I know it has been fluctuating a bit lately.
Well, we've ticked it up over the years. What we've used for the collection rate, we've ticked up, and who knows? I mean, there's going to be 2 more rate increases. We could have a recession, in which case, property tax receipts and other receipts.
As our budget grows, the 6% target grows.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
10%,
Yeah,
right?
right,
Yes.
exactly.
Exactly, right.
So you naturally phase out of the gross percent that you're targeting. Yeah, and of course, we are self-insured in a number of ways, and that's why we technically didn't have to have initially a medical reserve account, because that's already an implied purpose of.
Well, but don't forget, the reserves were to cover the incurred but not paid, Mike. That's why we have reserves, right?
It's for high loss months.
Yes, it could be for losses too, but it's also for that. Right.
It's for estimates that are incorrect.
At that as well, sure, another good reason, sure.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Tim, thanks.
All right, let's go on to the new business with our reports. Let's start with the revenue. Any questions? I think Ingrid and Mike are going to probably tag team and
Yeah.
try and do the best they can to answer whatever the members' questions may be. I will point out one small item. Under ARPA, $34,000 year-to-date revenue. We believe this is a mistake. Ingrid is looking into that, and if she can, any reminder, perhaps next month she can tell us what happened there.
It's the first sign of being hacked.
Before we get into any questions you may have, just a general statement that what you'll see here is, Ingrid and I were talking earlier, we have a 25% time elapsed with a 30% expenditure rate. But a lot of that is upfront payments in the first 3 months of a fiscal year that are non-recurring expenses as the year goes on. If we were to extrapolate that out, those front-end payments, we'd be around 25%. So that's why you see a 5% increment over the time elapsed number.
Any questions on the revenue side of the budget? All right, hearing none, let's go on to the expenditures. I guess I'll say 2 quick things, and then we'll take questions. I'm sure the members happen to notice that on page 13, the winter maintenance supplies were very expensive. There's a big encumbrance there for $214,000, and we're already over budget for the year to the tune of $83,000. This is for salt. Mike can give you the dollars per pound number, but I think it's a good example of the fact where I think in the spring when we did this budget, there was some discussion amongst the board members about potential commodity risks in the budget. Another example might be that if you go into the police, you'll see that their fuel is running well ahead of budget as well. So it's just something to keep in mind, which I know we're all thinking about.
Yes, if I could share what the numbers are on that, Tim. That was one example of what we talked about many times about the inflationary aspect hitting the government. So we went into this at $74.17 a ton, and the price now for municipalities is $95.55. So a significant increase, almost a 30% increase on that one item. So we have to hope that we have a mild winter, because if we don't, we're going to have to be purchasing more salt at the $95.55 a ton price.
So, Mike, what do we do each year with the salt and sand that we don't use?
We carry it over.
Yeah, we have silos.
We have silos, yeah.
So we carry it over, so we should have reserves, and we're
Yeah.
just simply
Yeah.
supplementing that, because we really did have kind of
Right.
a pretty mild winter last year,
Yes.
knock on wood,
Yeah.
that we do again this year. But, so I just wondered, because I think there was some talk at some point of, potentially being able to sell it back, but you're saying that we just keep it and add to it.
Yeah, and, that question's a good question, because the reserves we have, although would not never satisfy us for the full winter, were purchased at a lower price. So
Yeah.
if we had sold it back, we'd be buying it at a new price.
Right.
I think categories anyway, it's covered by the grants and aid operating expenses.
Yes.
I had a question on page 4. I believe this is building inspection permit. Was there some reason that the consulting was so much more than we thought it would be?
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm going to turn this over to Ingrid.
Sure.
Because we've been working closely on this, and there is a valid explanation. Ingrid?
Yes, so we, a part-time position was replaced with a consultant. And you can see in previous page, page number 3 and 105, there's nothing. There's no expenditures on that.
A personnel part-time
A
change.
personal part-time, yes.
I see.
So what Ingrid is describing is the light officer that was once in the $54,000 line, I think that is on that page, Ingrid, right? Is it 54?
45.
45.
Right.
45,000.
So that is now built into the other line. So we will see no expenditures on the $45,000 line.
So we have that amount to spend on consultants, is that what you're saying?
Right, so
Yes.
if you see an overage on that line, which we're pointing out here, that 45,000 helps represent for us a cushion against any overages, because we combined that position into the consultant line that's showing a high percentage of expenditures versus time elapsed.
By this point in the year, would we have already spent $40,000 on the consultants for that line, in which case then the remaining is just for this extra person? I don't know how to view this number.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think
Ah.
that the answer is yes to that. I
Okay.
think that would be an equal distribution, 'cause that's a part-time position here, working certain hours per week, so it would be a more equal distribution of expenditures every month versus the 45,000, so. On top of that, we've got a lot of permits going on right
Yes,
now.
I was
Ingrid,
going to
go ahead.
mention that too. There has been an increase in permits this year too.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, that lines up.
yes.
So then, is there some sort of savings associated with a consultant versus part-time help? I guess I don't understand the swap.
I think what she's saying is that not only is this an offset to the other item, we're generating a lot more revenue because the building permits are up,
Right.
which was on the revenue.
But coming back, yeah, that's right, that's exactly right. Coming back to your question, Nancy.
On the expense of
There's no benefits associated with, the $45,000 had benefits in it.
Oh, even
Yeah,
part-time?
Yes, so that was an agreement we had. Someone went from full-time to part-time. That's the savings.
So the consultant would not have any benefits?
That's right.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Diane?
Yes, page 9, the building supplies, they're encumbering, so I don't know if we're just buying stuff now because we can and it might be cheaper, I'm not really sure.
Okay, that's
So
405,
that's
the
for the
last three
police
numbers?
department?
Yes, police department.
Ingrid, go right ahead.
Sure. We had to purchase supplies for a generator repair. We had locker rooms that we had to purchase too. Parts for maintenance in HVAC system. And supplies have also tremendously increased throughout the year.
So do we have a generator and something happened to it?
Generator repair,
Yes.
she said.
Yeah.
Repairs.
The parts, yes.
Parts.
Yeah, part.
Okay. And I'm assuming the vehicle maintenance is damage of police cops and,
Yeah.
because that's high too.
Yep.
I'm just making that assumption, that's what that is.
Well, it was
Yeah.
pointed out that we had an accident.
Yeah, we had an
Yes.
accident, yeah. So that's, I just want to make sure that's what that is.
Yes.
Okay.
Nick, Mike?
Maybe just an informational question to Mr. Frieda here, and maybe here. Page 6, the contract obligations, is that the unsettled contract line
Let me just turn to that page and let's see.
under the personnel policy expenses?
It's the last item on 220, Mike, or, personal policy.
Yes,
That is?
yes.
Yeah. So Mr. Monaco's been working, maybe not overtime, but many hours. And I get reports that he strong-armed these unions into settling, which is really great. That's excellent news.
I don't think strong arm
Yeah.
would be the word I would use.
But what
Never
Rich,
take me literal.
so what,
I don't, but there's
Or
24,000
seriously.
people in this town watching this right now.
I'm going to master at settling the contract.
let me tell you, he has been a master. I'm going to tell you what he's done. He has flipped around the model, meaning that he is starting the contract negotiations and then bringing the attorneys in afterwards,
Yes.
which will do several things. He's already got close to 3 TAs, temporary agreements with unions, okay, because he's taken that approach, which I totally support. I come in, he'll ask me for some parameters, but he's the lead guy right now, and then I'll come in perhaps at the end. But what it also is designed to do, and this is very important, we, Ingrid, myself, and even Rich, because he's involved with this, are trying to level out this contractual obligation line so we don't get big hits after not solving contracts for 2 or 3 years.
Of course, yes. And they're just satisfied with that secretly for years. But with all the contracts that are settled, should there be more? Are we a little behind in deducting the amount we have set aside here of the 695? I mean, is there more to?
Well, we expended 115. I thought I heard we had temporary agreements for 2, and I think you settled 1, right, Mike?
Right, yep.
So I'm
Oh, okay.
assuming we only have the settled 1 in here,
Oh,
but
sorry.
I'm not sure.
I thought he had more than one settled. Okay.
Yeah, so there's,
I've talked with Rich too, and one thing I know, and Mike just sort of hinted this, is that, historically, our town, like a lot of towns, by the way, that the contracts have lagged, as we all know, and we're 2 and 3 years down the road, and we don't have them. So I know that, Rich has in his mind that he'd like to get these back on a schedule that ties in, a little bit closer with the expiration of the contracts.
Right. Now, we're going to see a big hit, Ingrid, myself, in October on that line.
Yeah.
Because the police have been paid.
They have been paid, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was like October 3rd or 4th, I think, Ingrid, we did that, right? So there's going to be a big, you're going to see a big
Yeah.
increase
No, it's
on
all
that.
good news. Good news that we're no longer behind the curve on all of these, with all these unions.
Okay.
Yeah, so this expedited approach should be commended.
On that same page, under
page?
personnel policy.
Or 6,
I'm
page
sorry,
6.
Okay.
page 6, the reserve accrued benefits, we're already at 108%.
Well, this came up last month. There's been a
Yep.
number of retirements of longstanding employees, so
Right.
the item just happens to be particularly large.
And it's just continuing to grow, right?
No, it'll depend on retirements. I'm not
Yeah.
sure exactly.
Retirements, yes.
Yeah, at this point, here we are now in October. This is another example of retirements where we had to front load the expense on that line, but I don't see the rest of this fiscal year any retirements. I really don't. Unless something comes out of the blue, there's a health issue or something, but, so hopefully that is another example of front loading an expense that's non-reoccurring.
Any final go ahead.
Ingrid, on page 16, the water for fire protection, we're at over half the budget expended. Is that due to paying a water bill twice a year, or is there another reason?
What
On
line is-
utilities, the first utility item.
I will have to look into that for
Yeah,
you.
no, I think, we'll look into it, but I believe that's the case. It's half a payment and half a payment, but we'll
Okay.
confirm that, okay?
Great.
That's what it looks like.
All right, if there's no other questions on the expenditures, why don't we go over to the special funds report?
Find it. There it is. So, one thing that I just wanted to point out, that I really should have pointed out last month when we got this updated MRSA, is if you look the very first column, which is beginning fund balance, dated July 1, 2022, you'll see recreation, police, fire, and then fire again down at the bottom, all have blanks, which means we're starting off the year with each of those accounts with a zero balance. And so, Mike, does that mean that in order to close the books on the last fiscal year, you had to empty all of those accounts?
Mostly, yes.
Okay, I just wanted
Yes.
to clarify that there wasn't any
Yeah.
big expenditures or things that were extra budgetary that we just didn't know about.
But some
I
of
think
these-
we normally do that, though,
Yeah,
don't
we
we?
do.
I think we always do that.
Well, in the past, we've left some money in there, but what some of these accounts do is they replenish themselves.
Right.
So I'm
Police
hoping-
typically,
You're
we
right.
do.
I'm hoping we'll see in the next couple of months, you'll see some dollars in there that's being replenished.
And the security for schools, is that something that should have been covered by the $2 million grant?
I believe that, and we'll make a note to double check, I believe that we bonded for the 2 million for security. They ended up getting a grant on top of that. The grant, I think, went into the general fund, and I believe that they're using a portion of the grant that they got over and above the 2 million. But we'll double check that, Ingrid, okay?
Okay.
I might be wrong about that, but that's my recollection on that.
Sure.
All right, if there's no other questions on special funds, why don't we move to the Board of Ed reports?
Do we know what year we are in the bus contract? That always comes up.
Good question.
Yeah. I think year two, but we'll double check that, Diane.
Okay, do they do that with cleaning services as well? Do they have a contract? Is it a yearly or multiple years?
So that cleaning contract, the same company that we use for the town side, I believe that's every 2 years, and I think that's coming up this year in June.
Okay, I was curious on that. We never really, I don't recall us talking about cleaning services. We always talk about bus.
Was there a second page? I think I only got one page.
Yeah, that's all I got too.
Do you have a second page, Diane? Around there?
No, I'm looking at
Oh, I'm sorry, look at that, okay.
that. No, they only gave us, I thought the same
Right.
thing. Why do we only have one page?
Right.
It kind of just ended.
Okay.
And I just had a quick question. Again, this is something that was last month, but it's still pertinent, I'm sure. I think we were told that the $350,000 that the Board of Ed received from the state of Connecticut for free lunches was supposed to expire sometime this month, even including throwing in additional, I don't know what it was,
I
$60,000.
want to say,
Right.
wasn't it extended?
So I think they were extending it, again, using surplus funds. But when I looked into this, it turns out that there's this additional thing from the U.S. Department of Agriculture that North Haven actually applied for. There was $1 billion relief fund due to supply chain challenges. And so they've provided funds to various schools, and I believe that that North Haven received an additional $60,000. So, Mike, do you know anything about this in addition to the SMART program that I think was the $350,000?
You know, they did mention this to me, but, you know, I'll have to check this, okay? I don't want to say anything that's incorrect on this.
They extended it.
Yeah.
The free lunch was extended through December 2nd.
Right. But what I'm not sure about that Diane's right about that. I'm not sure if there was funding to do that, or they decided based on some feedback in the school systems to continue it and utilize it out of their existing budget somehow, finding the money. That's what I'm uncertain of.
Okay,
So,
right. And so that's part two of my question is, certainly COVID is not done. It's not in our rearview mirror. However, I think we're in a much better place at this point. So I guess the question is, maybe you can elaborate on this feedback that would support the decision to continue providing free lunch for everyone, because obviously we've provided free lunch for those who are facing financial hardships for dozens of years. But this decision to provide free lunch to everyone, I think, is somewhat tied to the COVID pandemic. And so now it's a question of, are we in a different stage, and what is the rationale for continuing?
Well, I'll give you my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an opinion based on what we see not only here, but all over the state. Through these 2 years of this pandemic, there's been a high level of uncertainty, a certain degree of hopelessness, a large degree of isolation and loneliness, and a degree of social anxiety. And unfortunately, in some families, it's had an adverse effect on the family dynamic. And I think the manifestation of all that has been that we offered something that people really embraced during the pandemic, and then to just stop it quickly elicited feedback where people were saying, please, this was very important to us, our family, having these free lunches. And I think the Board of Ed listened to all that, and that's why I believe that's why I know they reinstated it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's my opinion as to the cause, but the decision was based on the feedback they got from parents and other people.
I see. Okay.
So,
And I'm sure that's something that will be revisited
yeah, I think so.
on a regular basis.
I do.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else have questions on the Board of Ed? If not, I'll take a motion on the reports.
Make a motion.
Second, please. Anyone?
Aye.
All in
Second.
favor?
Second.
Second. And all in favor? Aye.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. We did get in our package the meetings for next year, also the budget making and workshops for next year. You also did get a revised schedule for the regular meetings. As I think you all know, we have moved the meeting next month to the day prior. It will be on the 15th, Tuesday, November 15th, at the same time as normal, 6:30. Other than that, I'll ask if there's any questions on the schedules. Okay, if not, we do need a motion and a vote on the schedules.
I make a motion.
Second, please.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. All right, we're now at the public comment section. Anyone like to address the, sorry,
Sure, yeah,
just 1 second, Sally, please.
yeah. Every year I throw in my 2 cents as to how the previous budgetary year ended in terms of how much in the black we were. And because the MRSA grant and aid funds unused get returned to that account, that's not an expense. That is surplus the same way that the unappropriated fund balance change is surplus. And for that reason, I do see that in the previous budget year, we were in the surplus, including the difference in revenues versus expenses on the town side of $1,350,681. That's what I have. And if anyone would like a copy of my math, I have copies for you all. But it's too simple to even hand out. It's just accounting for the change in our MRSA reserves and our grant and aid reserves. I think we have to come to an agreement on how we term that fund and that account and that program. But there is nothing in my reconciliation to do with the Board of Ed, because their unexpended funds do in fact just more or less get placed into a reserve for other expenses. So that to me, that is still a delayed way of spending funds that they had appropriated to them in each and every fiscal year. So instead of around 95,000, I have 1,350,000 and change. That's how I look at it.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you
Mike.
for doing that, Mike. I appreciate it.
All right, Sally. I'm sorry,
Actually,
Nancy,
I
did you have
have
something?
two quick things to say before public commentary. First, I'd just like to wish our Vice Chair, Mr. Lianos, a speedy recovery. We certainly missed him this evening, and we certainly look forward to him joining our group again. And secondly, I just wanted to mention that on September 24th, along with Mr. Frieda, I participated in this in a Fire Ops Day that was sponsored by the North Haven Fire Department, and I appreciated the opportunity to spend the day doing simulation training in fire suppression and medical response and vehicle extraction. But most of all, I really appreciated the opportunity to directly engage with our firefighters and find out very specifically what it is they do and the types of equipment that they use and vehicles and so forth. And I really appreciated the opportunity to do that. Certainly, I have always respected all of our first responders, and so I did appreciate having the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, it was good to see you there, Nancy, and Sally was there also, and Bill Piper participated, so we had a good turnout, and it really gave, this is the second time I've done it. It's only the second time the fire department has done it, and you see the physical aspect of it when you do it, so it's really, I'm glad you came. Glad you came, Sally. Bill, glad you came.
Well, I give all four of you credit because I heard some of the specifics from Pat Nuzzolo, and it seemed like a challenging day, so I give all four of you credit.
Yep.
All right, anything else from the members? Sally?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Sally Buemi, 5 Blossom Drive. Yes, that was a great day, September 24th, with the fire department. Mr. Piper, Ms. Barrett, Mr. Frieda put on full gear, the whole bit, the breathing apparatus went in. I was more of an observer, I want to make that clear. But I did enjoy having the opportunity to ask questions. It was a really great day. I just had some comments about your update, Mr. Chairman, on the memorandum of understanding with regard to the carryover fund. And I understand we have to wait and get this memorandum next month, but from your update comments tonight, it seems to be that the Board of Finance's involvement will be whether or not to put the money in this fund or not. And once it's in there, then the Board of Ed will spend the money as they see fit, or at least that's the impression I got from what you said. So I just urge the members of the Board of Finance to review memorandums of understanding of other municipalities, which I had the opportunity to do. And I looked at quite a few, and I just want to mention 3 really briefly. One, and all 3, of course, are establishing a non-lapsing Board of Ed carryover account pursuant to 10-248A. So Clinton, for example, is establishing the account, but they say that the funds can only be used for special ed costs in excess of budget amounts or capital expenses, and that the town council, which is their budgetary equivalent to this Board of Finance, must authorize expenditures first after the BOE and superintendent present a request. Newtown likewise sets up an account, and they say that the Board of Ed shall, subject to the approval of the Legislative Council in consideration of recommendations from the Board of Finance, will authorize expenditures from the non-lapsing fund. So there is definitely Board of Finance oversight in Newtown as well as Clinton. And Westport has a very interesting hybrid. They say that the Board of Ed can make a written request specifying the proposed use of this Board of Ed carryover account, and that they can use it, the Board of Ed, as they see fit, up to $200,000 in a fiscal year. Once they get to that point, then the Board of Ed, let me read this so you get it correctly. After the $200,000 threshold is met, then additional amounts, quote, from the Board of Education carryover account shall be released only if the written request of the Board of Education specifying the proposed use is approved by the Board of Finance. So earlier, Mr. DiCello, you had asked Mrs. Barrett, do you have any objections to the Board of Ed deciding what is the best use of this money? I don't think that's really the question. I think the question is, as Mrs. Barrett said, the Board of Finance is the holder and the responsible party for the people's money. And so this extra level of oversight for this particular surplus money, with the vast majority of the Board of Ed money, they spend it as they see fit. But when it comes to surplus money being put into this special carryover account pursuant to this statute 10-248A, certainly other municipalities saw the benefits of a different level of oversight. And it is not a question of whether the Board of Ed will spend it properly. It's just a question of who the gatekeeper should be. So the point that I'm really trying to make in giving these examples is I urge the members of the Board of Finance to review other memorandums of understanding to see what other towns have done. There's I know we're North Haven and we can do what we want, but there's nothing wrong with getting some ideas from other places, and that's the point that I wanted to make. I did want to make one comment. Mr. Frieda, you mentioned something about... Yes,
if you
sir.
don't mind, I'm not sure exactly how you came upon these MOUs, if you call the towns or find them on a website.
Yeah.
But if you like, please give them to Ellen or Tammy, and maybe they could share them with the board members.
Well, I got them from Nancy Barrett, so she...
I can forward you the links. It's very
Yeah.
straightforward.
Sure.
They're very informative and very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that I just think that it would be prudent for all of you to do a little research on this rather unique opportunity to enter into a cooperative endeavor with the Board of Ed. And that's really the spirit of 10-248A. It is intended as a cooperative endeavor between the Board of Ed and the financing authority, whatever it shall be, and in this case, it's you guys here in North Haven. So Mrs. Barrett can perhaps provide that. I just wanted to say, Mr. Frieda, you mentioned something about the different model with the union contracts and how you're meeting directly first without the lawyers. As a lawyer for 39 years, I can honestly say the longer you keep the lawyers out of it, the better you are. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Okay. An honest, succinct opinion right there, so. Okay.
Mr. Piper, you're our lone other attendee this evening. Are there any questions you'd like to address the board?
No, since we're on this...
Why don't you wait till you get to the mic, please?
I will. Well, thank you. Bill Piper, 28 Bassett Road. And since we're on this topic, I might as well provide a few comments of my own. If I look at the statute, and I think we've ignored number 3, which says each such expenditure shall be authorized by the local board of education for such town. I'm definitely very much in favor of oversight, them reporting what they've done with the money. But again, based on the statute, once we give them the money in the unexpended education funds account, the Board of Finance gives them the money. It looks like it's still up to them to make the determination independently what to do with the funds. And if you notice on the history of the legislation, the subdivision 3, which I just read, re-expenditures to be authorized by the local board of education, was effective July 1, 2019. So I just wonder whether the towns that you've actually looked at the memorandums of understanding have actually not properly updated those based on the addition of that subsection of the statute. So
if I could answer this, just to give you some context, the Board of Education is supposed to vote after they close the books in the fiscal year and make a recommendation to the Board of Finance as to how much money, as well as how that money will be utilized before it comes before this Board of Finance. So they're supposed to vote. Last year, they didn't even vote. It was simply just transferred $1 million.
No, we're not talking about last year. I'm talking about this how we're going to handle this in the future.
And this most recent
And-
year that just
Right.
ended, again, they did vote, and it was simply transferred, again, before it came to this Board of Finance. So
Right.
that's 2
But again,
years in
that's
a
how
row.
it was in the past. We're
So
talking
2
about the
years.
future under
And
the
now
memorandum
going forward-
of understanding. Under the memorandum of understanding,
Yes.
up to 2% can be moved over into what's called an unexpended education funds account.
Yes.
By the Board of Finance.
Correct.
And then after that's done, under subsection 3 there, each such expenditure shall then be authorized by the local Board of Education for such town, as long as such expenditure under number 2 shall only be made for educational
Right,
purposes.
so those are the mandates from this
But that
Connecticut
is
state
after the
statute.
money's moved over, they need to decide what to do
And
with it.
then we
just like
can
the funds.
decide in our own language of our own memorandum of understanding, like any given town,
I-
how many other regulations we would like to impose.
Well, again, I think you can do that, but again, they still have the discretion to do that based on.
They only have that if we give it to them. If
That's
we
not what the
design-
statute says.
If
So I
we
think need-
design a memorandum of understanding, like any of these
That's-
towns, we
No, I
can
think
put
they've
anything we
not
want.
updated their memorandum of understanding. I think they're out of compliance with the statute. So I think that's a question for legal counsel.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? I mean, if you read that was added in 2019.
I-
What's the date on those memorandum of understanding?
I'd be more than happy to share
No,
you.
what's the date on the memorandum of understanding?
2021 was
So
one
I
of
don't
them.
know whether they actually did that with the advice of legal counsel.
I'm
'Cause the statute's pretty
I'm
clear.
certain they did. I cannot imagine the towns of Westport or Newtown did anything
We've seen
without legal
stranger things
counting.
happen.
Okay.
So, but thank you. I just
Sure.
wanted to bring that point up. But I'm
Sure.
definitely in favor of oversight because even if it is to their discretion, to do it after we fund the account, if they do something that, and they should report to us on a regular basis, to the Board of
Absolutely.
Finance, when I'm saying we.
Yes.
Having been a former member of the Board of Finance, I think we definitely want to report all the time, every time they move money out or do something with it.
Right, right.
Because then if they do something with it that we don't like, then we don't ever have to do it again, or we don't have to fund it at the, that level.
Well, I believe that
So I
understanding.
think we're all in agreement on that. I think it's more procedural than it, my comments are more procedural than they are.
Right. I'm all for procedure as well, and I think we should actually invoke this statute rather than simply allow the Board of Ed, as they have for the last 2 years, to just assume that they have carte blanche access to 2% of their budget every year.
Right.
Right?
Right. But, because I think, it should be something, again, if we're going to, I think that's exactly what we're coming to terms with now based on this discussion that we've had over the last few meetings. So.
Right. Well, we did it correctly 3 years ago, and we just haven't done it correctly the last 2 years. So thank you, Bill. I appreciate it.
No, thank you. So, it's hard to say, and I think a lot of it comes back too. I think if they can also agree to do it differently, like in the memorandum of understanding. I just wonder whether the other towns have actually fully looked at that addition to the statute.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Piper. Seeing no other residents in attendance, I will call for adjournment. Second, please.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Okay. Take care, Mike.
The preceding program is brought to you in part through a grant from the town of North Haven. Watch town meetings or other videos on demand at NHTV18.